Redundancy is not waste. Redundancy is the acknowledgement that systems fail, that the thing you depend on can break at the moment you need it most, that survival belongs to those who build backup upon backup rather than trusting any single solution. Engineers understand this instinctively. They build bridges stronger than they need to be, design machines with duplicate critical components, create systems where the failure of one part does not mean the failure of the whole. But farmers on the frontier often did not think like engineers. They built what they needed and no more, because resources were limited and labor was precious, and anything beyond the minimum seemed like waste. They trusted that one well would be enough, that one cistern would hold, that the single source of water they depended on would continue to flow because it always had, until it didn't. Isaac Reyes understood redundancy because he had learned its absence the hard way. In the village where he grew up in northern Mexico, there had been one well for 300 people, one source of water that everyone depended on, one point of failure that could destroy an entire community if it ever stopped producing. And in the summer of 1862, when Isaac was 17 years old, it stopped. The aquifer that fed the well shifted during an earthquake that was barely strong enough to knock cups off shelves. The well that had never failed went dry overnight, and the village that depended on it began to die. 43 people died that summer before the survivors could dig new wells deep enough to reach water. Isaac's mother was among them, dead of thirst within walking distance of a dry hole that had been wet his entire life. His father survived, but never recovered, spending the rest of his years warning anyone who would listen that one well was not enough, that backup sources could mean the difference between life and death, that the thing you trusted most could betray you without warning. Isaac listened. He listened because he had carried water to his dying mother and watched it do nothing because there was not enough, would never be enough when the only source had failed. He listened because his father's warnings made sense in a way that nothing else made sense after that summer. And when he came to Texas in 1875 with Elena and bought a small homestead in the hill country, he began building what his father had taught him to build: redundancy. The first cistern took 3 months to complete. Isaac dug it himself, a pit 20 feet deep and 12 feet across, lined with clay that he packed and sealed until it would hold water against the porous limestone beneath. He built a roof over it to prevent evaporation, constructed gutters on his cabin to channel rainwater into the cistern, created a system that would capture and store every drop that fell on his property. The cistern filled during the first good rain and held water perfectly, proof that his design worked, that his labor had not been wasted. His neighbors noticed the cistern because neighbors noticed everything on the frontier. They commented that it was well built, that Isaac knew what he was doing, that the Mexican farmer had skills that deserved respect. They did not notice when he immediately began digging a second cistern 50 yards from the first, starting the same process over again before the first cistern had even been tested through a full season, Judge Harlan Whitmore noticed. Whitmore owned the largest ranch in the county, thousands of acres of land with multiple wells and a creek that had never run dry in living memory. He considered himself the expert on water in this region, the authority on what was necessary and what was excessive, the man whose success proved that his methods were correct. He rode to Isaac's homestead on a September afternoon, found the Mexican farmer knee-deep in a hole that had no apparent purpose, and delivered his opinion with the confidence of wealth speaking to poverty. "Reyes," Whitmore called out from horseback. He did not dismount when speaking to farmers he considered beneath him. You already have a cistern. I can see it from here, covered and holding water. Why are you digging another hole?" Isaac looked up at the judge who controlled most of the county's politics and much of its economy. "Back up," he said simply. "If the first one cracks, I will have a second. If the second cracks, I will dig a third. One source is never enough." Whitmore laughed, the dismissive laugh of certainty, confronting what it considered foolishness. "One cistern is enough for a homestead this size. 2 is excessive. 3 would be absurdity. You are wasting labor that could be spent improving your land. This is why your people remain poor. You do not understand efficiency." "My people understand thirst," Isaac said. His voice was quiet but steady. "We understand what happens when the one thing you depend on stops working. You have never been thirsty the way I have been thirsty. I hope you never are. But I will not risk my family on hope." Whitmore rode away with the satisfaction of a man who had delivered wisdom to someone too stubborn to accept it. He told others in town about the Mexican farmer who was wasting his time digging unnecessary cisterns, about the immigrant who could not understand that American land was more reliable than Mexican land, about the foolishness of people who prepared for disasters that would never come. The story spread through the settlement with the mockery that small communities direct toward anyone who does things differently than everyone else. Isaac finished the second cistern in the spring of 1876. He began the third that summer, digging this one deeper than the others, lining it not with clay, but with stone that he hauled from a creek bed and fitted together with mortar he made himself. The stone lining took longer and cost more in labor, but Isaac had seen clay crack in the Mexican sun. He had watched cisterns fail because the lining could not withstand the cycles of wet and dry that the frontier climate produced. The third cistern would be different. The third cistern would hold even if the earth shifted beneath it. His third cistern saved 112 lives. Subscribe to Wild West Retribution and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened when the drought came proved that 3 was exactly the right number. The drought began in the spring of 1883 and did not end for 3 years. The first year was merely dry, rainfall 50% of normal, streams running low but still running, wells producing less but still producing. The second year was worse, rainfall 20% of normal, streams going dry, wells beginning to fail across the county. The third year was catastrophic, almost no rain at all, the sky white with heat from March through October, the land cracking open as moisture fled from soil that had not seen water in months. Isaac's cisterns had been full when the drought began. He had captured every drop of rain that fell on his property during the wet years, had filled all 3 cisterns to capacity, had stored water against the dry times because his father had taught him that dry times always came eventually. The water in those 3 cisterns represented years of careful collection, thousands of gallons that would mean the difference between survival and death if the drought lasted long enough. The first cistern cracked in the summer of 1884, the second year of drought. The clay lining, baked by heat and stressed by the shrinking soil around it, developed a fissure that started small and widened rapidly. Isaac discovered the crack when he noticed the water level dropping faster than evaporation could explain. He climbed down into the cistern and found the fissure, tried to repair it with fresh clay, watched the repair fail as the underlying crack continued to spread. Within a week, the first cistern was empty, its water soaked into the parched earth beneath. Months of stored survival gone into ground that would not give it back. He still had 2 cisterns. He rationed carefully, used water only for drinking and cooking and keeping his few animals alive, let his garden die because gardens could be replanted, but people could not. He watched the water level in his remaining cisterns with the attention of a man watching his own life measured in feet and inches. He calculated how long the water would last at various rates of consumption, made decisions about which uses were essential and which were luxuries he could no longer afford. The second cistern cracked in the spring of 1885. Same cause, different location. The clay could not withstand the stress of soil that expanded and contracted with moisture levels, soil that was now contracting to extremes that no one in living memory had seen. The fissure appeared near the bottom of the cistern, where the weight of water pressed hardest against the lining, where any weakness would be exploited first. Isaac watched his second reserve drain away over 3 days, thousands of gallons soaking into earth that was too dry to hold anything. Another backup failed, another layer of safety gone. He still had the third cistern, the one lined with stone, the one he had built deeper and stronger than the others, the one that had cost him extra months of labor and endless mockery from neighbors who said he was wasting time. The stone lining did not crack. The mortar held. The water remained where he had stored it, protected by construction methods that were slower and more expensive, but that did not fail when clay failed. The settlement noticed Isaac's remaining water around the same time their own sources began failing completely. The shallow wells that most homesteads depended on went dry in the summer of 1885. The creek that Judge Whitmore considered a permanent resource stopped flowing in August. The deeper wells held longer, but by September they too were producing only mud, and then nothing at all. The county that had mocked Isaac's excessive cisterns suddenly had no water at all, while the Mexican farmer still had thousands of gallons stored in stone. The first family came in September, the Hendersons with their 4 children, asking if perhaps Mr. Reyes could spare some water, just enough to keep the children alive until the drought broke. Isaac gave them water. He did not charge for it, did not demand payment or favors, simply filled their containers and told them to come back when they needed more. He remembered his mother dying of thirst within walking distance of a dry well. He would not let children die the same way if he could prevent it. More came. The Petersons came, then the Millers, then family after family as wells failed and stored water ran out, and the settlement began to understand that they had built their lives around single points of failure that had all failed at once. They came with buckets and barrels, with livestock that needed watering, with the desperation of people who had realized too late that one source was never enough. Isaac's cistern could not save everyone's cattle. There was not enough water for that, would never be enough water to maintain the herds that the larger ranches depended on. Livestock died by the hundreds across the county, animals that represented years of breeding and wealth that would take decades to rebuild. But the people survived. Isaac rationed his water carefully, calculated how many people the remaining supply could keep alive, distributed it with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what each gallon meant. Judge Whitmore came in October. He came not on horseback, but in a wagon, his ranch hands too weak from dehydration to ride, his own face showing the sunken cheeks and cracked lips of someone who had not had enough water in weeks. He had lost over 300 cattle. He had lost ranch hands who had left for places where water still existed. He had lost the certainty that had characterized everything he said and did since arriving in Texas decades before. He had learned what Isaac had learned in Mexico, that the thing you depend on can fail without warning, that one source is never enough, that the man you mocked for building backups was the only one still standing when the primary systems collapsed. Whitmore climbed down from his wagon with difficulty, walked to where Isaac stood by the stone-lined cistern, and removed his hat. He did not speak immediately. He stood looking at the water that remained when his creek and his wells and his certainty had all gone dry. "I called you foolish," Whitmore finally said. His voice was hoarse from thirst and something else, perhaps shame. "I told people you were wasting your labor. I said one cistern was enough for a homestead this size." He looked at Isaac with eyes that no longer held the confidence they once had. "2 of your cisterns cracked just like you feared they might. And the third one, the one I laughed at most, the one with the stone lining that took you so long to build, that one saved us all." Isaac looked at the man who had mocked him for years, who had told everyone in the county that the Mexican farmer was wasting time with his excessive preparations. He could have refused water. He could have reminded Whitmore of every dismissive comment, every superior laugh, every time the judge had treated him as lesser because of where he came from. He could have let the man who had been so certain suffer the consequences of his certainty. "Water is not a lesson," Isaac said. "Water is survival. You are thirsty. Your people are thirsty. I have water." He gestured toward the cistern. "Fill your barrels. Come back when you need more. And when the drought ends, dig more cisterns. Dig 3 where you would have dug 1. Line them with stone so they do not crack. Trust the backup more than you trust the primary, because the primary is what fails first." Whitmore filled his barrels. He came back the next week, and the week after that, and every week until the drought finally broke in the spring of 1886. His ranch hands came, his neighbors came, 112 people in total drawing water from a cistern that one man had built because his father had taught him that one source was never enough. The reckoning came after the first good rain, when the settlement could gather without risking dehydration, when the survivors could count their losses and acknowledge their debts. They met at the church, families who had made it through 3 years of drought, ranchers who had lost everything except their lives. A community learning that certainty was not the same as preparation. Judge Whitmore spoke first. He had not recovered his former confidence. The drought had broken something in him that would never fully heal. "I owe this community an apology," Whitmore said. His voice carried through the church, quieter than it had ever been. "I told you that one source was enough. I told you that Isaac Reyes was wasting his labor. I told you that excessive preparation was evidence of ignorance." He paused, gathering himself. 112 of us are alive because I was wrong, and Isaac was right. His third cistern held when everything else failed. His stone lining did not crack when every clay lining in the county cracked. His redundancy saved us when our efficiency nearly killed us. Isaac stood in the back of the church, uncomfortable with attention, wishing he could simply return to his work rather than listen to speeches about what he had done. He had not built the cisterns for recognition. He had built them because his mother had died of thirst, and he had promised himself he would never let that happen to anyone he could protect. When Whitmore finished, others spoke. They offered Isaac land, money, positions of authority that he did not want. They offered everything they could think of to repay a debt that could not be repaid because the debt was measured in lives. Isaac finally spoke when the offers became too much to ignore. "I do not want your land. I do not want your money. I want you to build cisterns." He looked around at the faces watching him. "My father taught me that one source is never enough. The drought taught you the same thing. Do not let the lesson fade when the rain comes back. Build 3 where you would build 1. Line them with stone. Trust the backup, because the backup is what saves you when everything else fails. The settlement built cisterns. Throughout 1886 and 1887, the sound of digging echoed across the county as families who had survived the drought prepared for the next one. They built with stone instead of clay. They built 3 instead of 1. They taught their children why redundancy mattered, told stories of the drought, and the man whose excessive preparations had been exactly excessive enough. Isaac Reyes lived on his Texas homestead for another 31 years, passing in the spring of 1917 at the age of 72. He added 2 more cisterns over the decades, never satisfied that he had enough backup, never trusting that the water would continue to flow. His children inherited his caution along with his land, and their children after them, and the homestead still has more cisterns than any other property in the county because the family remembers what their ancestor taught them. There is a marker at the original homestead now, a stone placed by the County Historical Society in 1962. It reads, "Site of the Reyes cisterns. 3 built when 1 was enough. The 3rd saved 112 lives during the Great Drought of 1883 to 1886. Redundancy is not waste." Judge Whitmore never rebuilt his former confidence. He spent the rest of his life telling people to build backups, to trust nothing that could not be replaced, to prepare for failures that might never come, because the failures that did come would take everything. He had learned what Isaac had always known, that certainty was a luxury afforded only to those who had never watched their single source of survival fail. If this story taught you something about building backups for the things you depend on most, subscribe to Wild West Retribution. We have more forgotten knowledge that saved lives when nothing else could. And tell me in the comments, what would you build 3 of when 1 seems like enough? 3 cisterns, 2 cracked, 1 held. That is the arithmetic of redundancy when the drought that everyone said would never come took everything that was not built to survive it.